Thanks, Julian, for hosting this event, and Brandy, where are you, for your very uplifting thoughts. I enjoyed that. And Ash, for your thoughtful remarks. Before I begin, I'd just like to, I don't need that. I don't think I do. We're right, are we? Before I begin, I'd just like to say, some of you might find this a little hard-hitting, but this is what I present to large audiences around the world, lately mostly in Europe, where the campaign against golden rice is centered. So I'm dealing with a very highly political charged situation, and with a media that is skeptical and has only heard the negative side. And so I'm trying to give a somewhat impassioned plea to allow golden rice now. Before I go into the presentation, I just want to show you how this subject can be explained in 1.5 minutes.
Vitamin A deficiency kills more children than either malaria, HIV/AIDS, or tuberculosis. It is the biggest killer of children in the world. Hello, I'm Patrick Moore. I was one of the co-founders in Greenpeace back in the early 1970s while I was doing my PhD in ecology. I've been an independent environmentalist for the last 25 years, and now I'm leading the campaign to allow golden rice now. Golden rice is a genetically modified variety of rice in which two genes have been inserted into the rice plant in order to put beta-carotene in the grain of rice, technically known as the endosperm. Beta-carotene is an essential nutrient for all animals, including humans. That's what we make vitamin A with. We are capable of ingesting beta-carotene and turning it into vitamin A, which is essential for our eyesight and our immune system. Golden rice is identical to other rice varieties, except for the addition of beta-carotene, which is an essential nutrient and can only cause benefits to health. Golden rice offers the benefit of ending vitamin A deficiency without any additional risks. Greenpeace and GM Watch are the main opponents of golden rice. Contact them and demand that they make an exception on humanitarian grounds to their zero-tolerance policy on genetic modification.
So with the presentation, I'll begin by just explaining where I come from. I come from here, where in 1952, my home was on that floating camp where I lived until I was 14. There was no road there. Everything was boats. Today, the village looks like this. There's still only a handful of full-time residents, but it's become a fairly major sports fishing center for salmon and halibut and other fish, because it's right on the west coast of northern Vancouver Island. This is my cabin there, where I spend time in the summer and get there in other times of the year when I can, made by hand from western red cedar. And here's the view in Winter Harbor. So I didn't realize how lucky I was as a child growing up playing on the tide flats by the salmon spawning streams until I was sent off to boarding school in Vancouver at age 14, where I soon learned city ways, finding myself eventually at the University of British Columbia studying the life sciences, biology, biochemistry, genetics, a little forestry, and then in the mid-1960s, before the word had become known to the general public, I discovered the science of ecology, the science of how all living things are interrelated and how we are related to them. At the height of the Cold War and the height of the Vietnam War and the threat of all-out nuclear war, and the emerging concern for the environment, I was transformed while doing my PhD in ecology into a radical environmental activist. Can't seem to get my hair to go that way anymore. I found myself in a church basement with a like-minded group in Vancouver planning a protest voyage against US hydrogen bomb testing in Alaska. We proved that a somewhat ragtag-looking bunch, that's me under the P in 1971, could sail an old fishing boat across the North Pacific, provide a focal point for media attention to opposition to the tests, and help change the course of history. When that H-bomb was detonated in November 1971, it turned out to be the last hydrogen bomb the United States ever let off. There were more atomic tests after that, but President Nixon, at the height of the Cold War, canceled the remaining H-bomb tests. Flushed with victory, on our way home from Alaska, we were welcomed into the big house of the Namgis Nation at Alert Bay, near my northern Vancouver Island home, where they made us brothers of the tribe. For Greenpeace, this began the tradition of the Warriors of the Rainbow. It's after a Cree legend that says one day when the skies are black and the birds fall dead and the waters are poisoned, that people around the world will join together to save the earth. We named our ship the Rainbow Warrior, and I spent the next 15 years full-time in the top committee of Greenpeace, campaigning around the world. Next, we took on French atmospheric nuclear testing in the South Pacific. France was still detonating atomic and hydrogen bombs in the air in the 1970s, sending radiation around the southern hemisphere. They were a little more difficult. It took years to drive these nuclear tests underground at Mururoa Atoll in French Polynesia, and as late as 1985, under direct orders from President Mitterrand, French commandos bombed and sank the Rainbow Warrior in Auckland Harbor, killing our photographer. But the campaign continued till long after I left Greenpeace. It wasn't till the mid-90s that nuclear testing finally ended in the South Pacific and most other places around then too. Going back 10 years, here I am driving a small rubber boat into the first encounter with the Soviet factory whaling fleet in the North Pacific in 1975. We confronted the whalers, putting ourselves in front of their harpoons in our little rubber boats to protect the fleeing whales. This got us on television around the world, bringing the Save the Whales movement into everyone's living room for the first time. Just 4 years later, factory whaling was banned in the North Pacific, and by 1981 in all the world's oceans. Here I'm sitting on a baby seal off the east coast of Canada in 1978 to protect it from the Hunters Club. I was hauled off to jail, the seal was clubbed and skinned, but this picture appeared in over 3,000 newspapers around the world the next morning. This and many other direct actions brought changes, not enough in my estimation, to the way in which Canada manages its East Coast seal herds. Anyways, by the mid-80s, we had grown from a church basement into a group with $100 million a year coming in and offices around the world. Presidents and prime ministers now spoke of the environment on a regular basis. For me, it was time to make a change. I had been against at least 3 or 4 things every day of my life for 15 years. I decided to figure out what I was in favor of for a change, to make the transition from the politics of confrontation, which is basically about telling people what they should stop doing, to the politics of trying to find consensus about what we should do instead. There is no escaping the fact that over 7 billion people wake up every morning on this planet with real needs for food, energy, and materials. Sustainability, which for me was the next logical step after environmental activism, is partly about continuing to provide for the food, energy, and material, maybe even getting a little more food and energy for people in the developing countries, while at the same time constantly striving to reduce our negative impact on the environment. Now, a lot of people think those are mutually exclusive, that the more people there are and the more stuff they use, the more damage will be done to the earth. That is not true. It's actually possible through changes in our practices, turn out the light when you leave the room, and changes in our technologies. Put in a compact fluorescent and get rid of the incandescent. Now you're only using 1/4 the light you did before, plus turning it off when you leave the room. Now you're only using 10% or 5% of the light you did before. And this applies to everything we do in our lives, especially the 2 biggest users of energy and materials which many of us have, a home and a car or 2. That's where most of our energy use and material use is, and government doesn't have to tell us what to do about our home and car's energy system or what size of car or what fuel efficiency. We can make all those choices ourselves. So actually we have private control individually over most of the energy and material choices that we make, and that is what sustainability is all about. Why did I leave Greenpeace after 15 years? When we began, we had a strong humanitarian orientation to save humanity from all-out nuclear war. That's the peace in Greenpeace. The green, of course, is the environmental side, which is well and good, but along the way, Greenpeace and much of the rest of the environmental movement drifted away from the peace part and ended up more or less characterizing the human species as the enemy of the earth, as if there was the humans and then there was the earth and we were its enemy. In other words, humans are separate from the environment Rather than the truth, which we are part of and integral to the Earth's environment, we come from the Earth's environment. We evolved with all the other species of life on this Earth, and we're all on the same time front here together in the year 2014. So I had to leave because I could not live in a situation where people were beginning to see ourselves as the main problem in the universe instead of a solution to the problems. And then on a very specific front, I call this the sharp end of the stick, I had to leave because my fellow international directors, I was one of 5 for 6 years before I left, began to adopt policies that I could not accept from a scientific point of view. It just turned out that none of my fellow directors had any formal science education, and I did, and I understood something about toxicology and chemistry and biology, and Greenpeace decided to name chlorine the devil's element and call for a global ban on the use of chlorine. Now, there are a number of toxic chlorine compounds. Even elemental chlorine as a gas is extremely toxic. But it's also the most important element for public health and medicine. Adding chlorine to drinking water is the biggest advance in the history of public health, and most of our pharmaceuticals that we use today, for antibiotics in particular, are based on chlorine chemistry. In fact, the reason chlorine is so important to public health is precisely because it is toxic to bacteria, which are trying to kill us. And so to see things in this way, it wasn't possible for my fellow directors, as they had this vision of a world with nothing toxic in it, and that included chlorine. So I had to leave because it was not the right choice. Yes, there could be certain chlorine elements that are banned for certain uses or restricted because you don't want chlorine gas in your living room. It'll kill you. But on the other hand, you do want chlorine in your drinking water, as it prevents communicable disease from going through the population, diseases like cholera. And in general, I saw my Greenpeace turning into an organization that was emphasizing sensationalism, misinformation, and particular fear. Fear of your food, fear of your water, fear of your air, fear of everything, fear of climate change. It's all about fear, and that is not where I'm coming from. I think environmental issues need to be addressed without so much emotion, through science and logic, to understand what the best pathway is forward to balance the environmental, social, and economic priorities that we have in our everyday lives. And just to make it clear, you'll see on the internet everywhere, people are saying, no, I wasn't actually a founder of Greenpeace, that I was only a minor player and all of this stuff. This is a screenshot of the Greenpeace International website in February 2007, about a week before they took my name off this list, the committee's founders and first members. And I'm no longer listed as a founder of Greenpeace because they didn't like the fact that I came out in favor of nuclear energy on my own because of what I believe in terms of energy. That's a whole other subject, but that's why they took my name off the list, not because I wasn't a founder of Greenpeace. Allow golden rice now. So let's just get into the issue. And before we talk about golden rice now, this is Tony Alfonso, who is the lead scientist in the Philippines Rice Research Institute, in charge of the program of developing golden rice and trying to get to the stage where he can apply to the government to get through the Byzantine red tape network that is required of any new GM food. To begin with, it is important to recognize that the term genetically modified has been turned into a propaganda term to mean just genetically modified in the DNA sense. We are all genetically modified, every single one of us, and every species that has been created through sexual reproduction from a mother and a father, whether it's a rabbit or a flower or a human, is genetically modified because they are not identical to their parents. They are a random mixture of their mother's and father's genes, and that is a modification. So it's actually, genetic modification is a very general term implying a whole bunch of different possibilities. And here is another way to cause genetic modification. In agriculture, we call it conventional breeding, where you basically cross a male and a female with each other in order to get a more desirable plant. If you look at peaches, they were smaller than a grape when they started with the wild plant, and now they've got this big juicy thing. That's all been done through conventional breeding, genetic modification. Conventional breeding is exactly the same as arranged marriage in human culture, where the species don't mix randomly, someone else chooses which ones to mate with each other. In the way parents choose a daughter and a son to mate with each other in arranged marriage, a farmer chooses a male plant and a female plant to mate with each other in hopes of improving it, in that way modifying its genetics. Then there is mutation breeding. Very few people are aware of this, but a large percentage of the seeds that are used today in both organic and conventional agriculture were produced by heavy bombardment of radiation on those seeds to impact and mutate the DNA. And if you take 1 million seeds and bombard them all with high-level gamma radiation, 1 or 2 of them might end up with something interesting in it. And so you plant 1 million seeds and see if anything interesting comes up. And if something does, all of a sudden you've got the durum wheat that we use for all our pasta today has been created through radiation breeding, not conventional crossing with male and female, but actually bombarding seeds with radiation. There's also chemical mutation breeding. A mutagenic chemical called colchicine is used. You soak the seeds in colchicine. This mutates the DNA in all kinds of different ways. It's a random process. And then you plant them again to see if anything interesting comes up. Many of our crops are now, and for 80 years they've been doing this, are produced this way, and these don't have to be labeled, even though this is a real scattergun approach, and many of the alterations that are made to the DNA are nothing to do with what you want, and you don't even know what they are half the time, but you get something interesting, so you go with it. Then there's marker-assisted breeding. Because we can now read the genome of plants and animals, we know the whole sequence. And so we can do normal conventional breeding, but knowing what the genome is, not just knowing what it looks like to the eye. You want to breed plants together that are going to make a better plant, but if all you can see is the plant and you don't know what its genetic makeup is, you can't do it anywhere near as quickly as if you actually know the genetic makeup. This is how many of the big seed companies are now going forward with fruits and vegetables, rather than using genetic engineering, using marker-assisted breeding. Because vegetables, there's many traits that you can improve with this approach. Then there is recombinant DNA biotechnology, which is the proper name for genetic modification as we use it in popular parlance today, in which a gene from one species is snipped out from the chromosome and moved into the chromosome of another species. Now, it has been said that this is totally unnatural and is something that has never occurred in nature. This is so not true. For millions of years, bacteria have been moving pieces of DNA randomly from one species to another. And scientists know this now because they look at certain species and they say, how did that get there? The only way it could have arrived there was by being brought from another species, across species lines. And there's lots of literature on this. You can look it up. It's been happening throughout the history of evolution, that genes have been moving across species. All we've done is learned how to do it methodically, so we know which piece we're taking and the trait that it confers on the plant and move it into another plant. And it's not done with animals except for only one. There's one Atlantic salmon, which has been engineered to keep its growth hormone on over the winter and thus grow faster. It's not really a new trait, it's just that it's Atlantic salmon, and all salmon shut their growth hormone down in the winter because it's cold. But if you grow them in aquaculture, you can keep feeding them through the winter as long as they have their growth hormone turned on, and then they grow faster. This is a list, partial list, of organizations that say that the genetically modified crops that are approved for use today are safe, with no exception. And as a matter of fact, some of them say may even be safer than conventional varieties because they have been so thoroughly tested, far more tested. Well, who tests carrots, just regular carrots? What would you test it for? You know, that sometimes there's some testing to see if there's pesticide residues, but not really, you're not really analyzing the carrot itself. And whereas with GM foods, the analysis is the entire plant. Now, this is a list that could go on across this room and up the ceiling on the other side, because the truth is every credible science, health, and nutrition organization in the world says this about GM foods, the ones that are approved because they've been through the testing procedure. This is the uptake of biotech crops worldwide. The red line is developing countries. The bottom green line is industrialized countries. You can see that the acreage of biotech crops in the developing world has actually now surpassed. The dark green countries are the ones which allow biotech crops to be grown. 27 countries, 18 million farmers. 95% of those are smallholders. They are not big agribusiness farms. They are mostly small farms because there's 18 million farmers involved on about 12% of the total farmland in the world, even though a large area of the planet is still, legally at least, off limits to GM. If the countries in light brown there approved GM for growing like the other countries have, that number would be double or triple what it is because of the fact that once farmers have access to these seeds, they buy them. This is a woman in the Philippines where in 2002, the farmers forced the government to allow them to grow GM corn, which is resistant to the corn borer, an insect that bores into the corn and eats it up. And they have to spray insecticide at least once a week on this crop if they're going to save the corn from being ruined by the corn borer. With this BT corn, as it's called, a genetic modified corn, the corn is resistant to the corn borer and therefore does not have to be sprayed with insecticide for the corn borer. It may have to be sprayed for other insects, but far less frequently, the corn borer being the really big problem. And their income has increased by $155 million in this one part of the Philippines since they did this, and insecticide use has gone down by more than 50%. Whereas Greenpeace said to poor farmers, most of whom don't have very much education, that if they started planting this corn, there would be dying children and cancer clusters. Absolutely unfounded propaganda, but people are going to be afraid when you tell them their children are going to die and have cancer clusters. But that didn't stop them. They have gone ahead, and Philippines is now growing a lot of this corn. The other interesting story is, well, and there's many of them, in India, farmers forced the government to legalize genetic cotton in 2002 because they saw how well it was doing in other countries. Since then, in a 10-year period from 2002 to 2012, cotton production has more than doubled in India on the same area of land. India has gone from importing 30% of its cotton to exporting 20% of its cotton, and 70 million people in cotton farming are doing far better than they were before this cotton was introduced. And it's again resulted in a huge reduction in insecticide use in cotton, because it's the same kind of trait that I showed you previously in the corn. Here's a good example of why farmers prefer seeds that have been modified to be resistant against insects. On the left, you have potatoes that are conventional bred. On the right, you have potatoes that have been engineered to be resistant to the potato beetle. If you were a farmer, which seeds would you buy? It's as simple as that. That is why farmers buy these seeds, because they know the results will be better than if they buy seeds of plants that can be eaten by insects without a lot of insecticide being used. That's the general picture. Now, vitamin A deficiency. This is a map of the severity of vitamin A deficiency in the world today. This is in preschool age children, up to 5 years old. Look at Mexico, is just as severe as India. It's a really interesting example because one of the problems with Mexico is that in traditional agriculture they have bred their corn to be white because they like their tortillas white, not yellow. They've bred the beta-carotene out of their corn on purpose without knowing what they were doing, and therefore are not getting vitamin A from corn. Then they eat white rice and beans that don't have the pod. Inside the beans have no beta-carotene. The green pod of the bean has beta-carotene, but they have the kind of beans that you don't eat the pod more than often than not. They mix rice and beans together. And so they end up with highly deficient in vitamin A. But even northern South America, look at Africa and look at South Asia. The worst problems are in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. This is a girl who has fortunately gone blind in only one eye from vitamin A deficiency. 250 million preschool children are vitamin A deficient, and more than 2 million die each year. About 8.1 million children die each year before grade 1. Preschool children die each year from various causes, including malaria, HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis. But vitamin A deficiency takes over 1/4 of them, and it isn't even a disease. It is just a nutrient deficiency. It's not as if there's a bacteria in you that's trying to kill you. It's only the fact that you don't have vitamin A. These are the two co-inventors of golden rice, Dr. Ingo Potrykus from Switzerland, a government scientist, and Dr. Peter Bayer from Germany, a university professor. Both of them molecular biologists, both of them aware early in the 90s of this humanitarian tragedy, and both set out then to develop a strain of rice that contains beta-carotene. They soon found that it was not possible to do it with conventional breeding. That is why they turned to genetic engineering in order to get the beta-carotene into the grain of rice. See, every green plant has beta-carotene in its leaves, including rice. It's not as if putting beta-carotene in rice is something that rice never had before. Its leaves are full of it. It just doesn't put any in the grain, whereas corn does. That's why corn is yellow. And so do carrots put it in the root, and so does sweet potatoes put it in the tuber. There's lots of food crops that put beta-carotene into the edible part. But rice is an exception, and 70% of the poor in the world use rice as their main calorie, and therefore the poorest of those who get only a cup of rice a day die before their parents' eyes by 2 million a year. And it's not the right way for things to happen. Parents are supposed to die first. Here's golden rice and regular rice next to each other. The only difference is that the golden rice contains beta-carotene. The pathway for its creation in the grain has been put into the grain of rice itself by inserting genes into the seed of the plant, which the part we eat is not the seed. The embryo is taken off rice before it is prepared. They had to put it in the embryo. It was a very complicated and difficult task with 6 separate steps to put this pathway, metabolic pathway as it's called, into the rice plant. Under the agreement of the Humanitarian Golden Rice Project, any farmer in the developing world will get this trait for free. All of the golden rice is being grown in government and humanitarian funded rice research institutes in the Philippines, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. That trait will be given out free. Once golden rice is out, rice breeds true. So every golden rice plant will produce golden rice seeds, and farmers will be allowed to reuse their seed forever. So once it's out for eternity, and whoever wants it then is going to be able to have it. And we believe that it will spread very quickly once parents find out that it can cure their children, as long as they're not too far gone. Because if you're already blind, you can't be cured of blindness, but if you're still alive, you can be cured of death. And half the kids that go blind each year from vitamin A deficiency, which is between 250,000 and 500,000, die within a year of going blind. So as soon as this comes in, we can stop vitamin A deficiency from even happening, never mind causing these terrible afflictions to people. These are the organizations who are directly involved with developing golden rice from a humanitarian perspective. The Golden Rice Humanitarian Board is led by Dr. Ingo Potrykus, the founder of Golden Rice. And he was on Time magazine in 2000 here, and it's been 14 years now since golden rice was invented. If golden rice was a cure for a disease, say malaria, and someone found a cure, it wouldn't take 14 years for it to become adopted. Look at Ebola, the virus Ebola. They are working in labs right now with genetic modification to try to find a vaccine for that virus. If they find it, they will use it, and it won't take much testing before they do. Whereas golden rice, which isn't a medicine, it's not a poison meant to kill a bacteria, it's a nutrient meant to cure vitamin A deficiency. And yet it is being opposed stronger than any medicine ever would be because of the anti-GMO movement. All we're asking is, okay, have your GMO anti-movement, but make an exception for this one humanitarian product because it is worth it. There's no possible harm it could cause. Look who else is involved. The Rockefeller Foundation. They are a humanitarian charity. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the biggest funder now of golden rice because they know that it will work. They wouldn't fund it if they thought it would be a failure. And also the Helen Keller International. Helen Keller was a blind woman who succeeded in life and became a role model for blind people. And that international organization is responsible for preventing blindness and caring for the blind on an international level. And that's why they're in there, because vitamin A deficiency is way far and away the greatest cause of blindness in the world. This is a golden rice field trial in the Philippines at the Rice Research Institute, growing the rice to make sure it's going to work properly in the local environment because they're putting the golden rice trait into local varieties of rice so that it'll work for the farmers. Here is a Greenpeace demonstration in Manila, Philippines, associating golden rice with death. In other words, trying to scare the parents into not wanting to use golden rice because they're saying it's going to kill you, instead of recognizing that it's going to cure you. It is the ultimate in misinformation. And here is a group of urban activists on August 8, 2013, destroying the golden rice field trial in the Philippines. Greenpeace tweeted immediately when this happened. They were obviously there. They claim they didn't have anything to do with this. They tweeted that Filipino farmers have destroyed the golden rice field trial. These are not farmers. These are urban activists from Manila bussed in order to destroy the golden rice. No doubt Greenpeace paid for the buses. And their friends Masipag, who are this ultra-leftist anti-government group in the Philippines that Greenpeace has used as a front in order to oppose golden rice. This is a paper that was done as, well, I should just add on this. Greenpeace says there isn't enough scientific research into golden rice, and then they destroy the research. And in this case, where Dr. Tang, the lead author on this paper, a Chinese-American scientist working at Tufts University in Boston as a clinical child nutritionist, first they tested golden rice on American adults. Not to see if it was toxic, everybody knows this, there's no possibility of that, but to see if it worked at delivering vitamin A to the blood. They proved it did and published a paper similar to this in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Then Professor Tang, who is Chinese-American, but she escaped the Cultural Revolution under Mao to come to the United States for her education and is in her 60s now. She said, we have to test this on children who are at risk of vitamin A deficiency, not in the United States. So she teamed up with 3 Chinese academies of science and health. She got the support of the National Institutes of Health in the United States, went through the bioethics committee of her university to make sure the design of her experiment was acceptable, got written permission, consent forms from the parents of 23 Chinese children. There were other children involved as placebos, but the 23 who were fed golden rice had written permission from their parents. When this paper was published in 2012, Greenpeace tweeted into China, American scientists are using Chinese children as guinea pigs for potentially dangerous rice. And that caused a huge storm of public outcry in China. Politicians had to save face. They fired 3 top people in the 3 science and health organizations that Professor Tang was working with, and now they're going after her. And she has actually been relieved from her position at Tufts University, and they have threatened to take this paper out of the Journal of Clinical Nutrition because they say she violated ethics when she actually had permission from the bioethics committee. So they have twisted this story. You would not believe what they have done, but it's amazing what they can do when Greenpeace and the Chinese authorities and everybody else is after this poor woman, she's just a scientist at a university trying to prove that golden rice works, which she did in this paper. Nobody questions the science in this paper. We have had to arrange for lawyers from a charity in Washington, D.C. to defend her, and so far they have not pulled a paper, and we're hoping that they will realize the error of their ways in suggesting they do so in the first place. Again, Greenpeace says there hasn't been enough testing, then they trash the scientists who do the testing. Here is Greenpeace International's page on golden rice, making it look like a carnival with a snake oil salesman selling you golden rice illusion, fake remedy for vitamin A deficiency. This is a crime to do this, because actually golden rice is not an illusion. It is growing in field trials in 3 rice research institutes in South Asia. And it's been 15 years of slogging away trying to get through the barrage of opposition that Greenpeace has created to getting this into the real world to the children who need it. Then there's Vandana Shiva, kind of a cult figure in the West from India. She's educated in Oxford, but she is a negative force in this world when it comes to farmers and food and nutrition. She says farmers growing GMO is like saying rapists should have freedom to rape. She says 270,000 Indian farmers have committed suicide since Monsanto entered the Indian seed market. It's genocide. So she is saying that the genetic cotton that is now over 90% of the cotton grown in India is genocide, when in fact, this is the yield of cotton in tons per hectare up until when genetic cotton was introduced here. Here's the uptake of genetic cotton in percentage. It's not up close to 90 here. And here's the increase in yield. Double. That's why cotton production has doubled in India. Here's the suicides in India. Farmer suicides in India actually have gone down since cotton was introduced. But the big lie is that it's farmers who are the main suicides in India. 90% of the suicides in India are in the urban environment. Only 10% of the suicides are in rural environments, who are not all farmers either. It's a big number because there's 1.3 billion people in India. But India has a lower suicide rate per capita than the United States. And they're making it seem like there's genocide from genetic cotton over there. India is actually more like Canada, Sweden, Australia, New Zealand, whereas here is the biggest suicide in the world, in Eastern Europe, China, and Japan. Why Japan? I'm not sure. I understand Russia and Eastern Europe, but the Lord works in mysterious ways. Here's a lovely fellow, the Health Ranger. This guy, Mike Adams, lives in Ecuador because there's no extradition treaty between the United States and Ecuador, so he can't be got by the law for his fake hundreds of websites leading people with diet schemes and get well schemes to his natural website, the Health Ranger. And to drive traffic to his websites, he demonizes GMO, Monsanto, corporations, all these things, and drives them to his website. He's Taiwan-based, so he can't be taxed in the US. And he's making what, $500,000 a month? Something like that, off these fake websites. They're just, this is the snake oil salesman. And here is what he put up not long ago, a couple months ago, encouraging people to kill those engaged in genetic engineering as if they're Nazis, including John Stossel, just a reporter on TV, who happens to have reported positively on this science. He said he didn't do this. The FBI was called in. It was proven very quickly that his fingerprints were all over the coding for this website, and it came down after 3 days. But it's still in the web archive where everything is. But he's quite a piece of work. And there he's got every 30 minutes a farmer commits suicide due to GMO crop failures, which is just a total lie. But that's what he says. So the good news is 40 grams, the amount Tony's holding in his hand, is enough golden rice to completely eliminate blindness and death in children. A daily ration of that is all that's needed. So we only need to put about a quarter of your rice with golden rice. But golden rice will end up costing exactly the same as normal rice. That's why they've taken this path. It means you don't need to pay for vitamin pills, and which you can't get to most of the people anyways, because they're living in these huge urban slums and living beyond the reach of motorcycles even out in the country, in rural environments where they eat their own food right there, so it's not possible to even fortify it with vitamin A. This is biofortification, where the plant itself produces the essential nutrient in the crop. And we've been over in Europe 3 times, Michael and I and my wife Eileen. This started as a family campaign in Winter Harbor on August 8th, 2013, when the Vandals destroyed the field trials. I've been talking and writing about golden rice ever since it was invented in venues around the world, but I was just talking and writing. I decided it was time to get up and really do something and to create a campaign around this. And we've had tremendous success in Europe at turning the media around. If you go to our media page, you will see it's full of positive reporting of golden rice, which never occurred before we went. And 2 people from Canada went to Europe and changed the whole tone of the conversation, made a ton of good friends over there. And that's what Brandy said, quoting from Margaret Mead, that a few people can change the world. As a matter of fact, that's the only way you can change the world, is with a few people starting with a kernel of hope and with drive and saying, this has got to stop. Now we see in Germany this recent poll that shows young people are accepting golden rice even though they're told it's a GMO in the question. Because I've found, and Mike's found too, that young people today are different than my generation, which was distrustful of technology because of the bomb and because of a lot of mistakes that were made in chemistry in the early years, and Bhopal and all of that sort of thing, which those kind of things are not really happening a lot these days. And we're not under the same kind of threat of nuclear war as we were back then, where it was going to wipe out the whole world. Young people are more trusting of technology because of laptops and cell phones and all of the amazing gizmos there are these days, which didn't exist back then, and the internet and everything. So there it is. You've got 2/3 of young people between 18 and 29 supporting golden rice in Germany, even though Germany is the focal point for Greenpeace's opposition to golden rice and GMOs in general. This is very hopeful. Greenpeace says golden rice is a Trojan horse for GMOs. That is their problem with it. They're afraid it might give GMOs a good name if it's successful in curing all these kids. On the other hand, they say it won't work, that it's no good. Just day before yesterday, Doug Parr, Chief Science Officer for Greenpeace UK, was on BBC in England saying it won't work. He said it doesn't even exist yet. He actually claimed that there is no such thing as golden rice, that it's just like Greenpeace says, an imaginary thing, when in fact it is a very real thing and has already been tested for 15 years. So if golden rice is truly a Trojan horse for whatever, for golden rice, then I'm getting in the horse. And I'm taking the scientist in that horse with me, and I'm inviting all of you to come in the horse too. Because I know who won the battle that involved a Trojan horse. The guys in the horse. They won. So let's make the Trojan horse for golden rice. Never mind GMOs. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But so many people are putting their bets on this, and I am too, as a lifelong understanding of nutrition and science. And so is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and many other people who understand genetics and food are saying this is the best, least cost way to go to get vitamin A to these 250 million people who are deficient in it. So, as I say, let's get in the horse. Here's one of our first demonstrations. We've demonstrated all over Europe. We've demonstrated against Greenpeace with banners saying you guys are guilty of a crime against humanity for opposing golden rice. The second they say that we'll make an exception for golden rice, we will not then say, well, you better say yes to all GMOs. That is not our campaign. Our campaign is purely to get them to say we will lay off golden rice as an exception because of humanitarian grounds of what it can do to help all these children from dying every year. Every day, 6,000 children die. If what Greenpeace does stops golden rice for a month, 6,000 times 30 children die. It's, you know, Ebola is a terrible risk, but nowhere near the kind of people are dying from that as are dying from this. It makes a big splash in the news. It's very, you know, and ISIS and all of this, when people die in the wars and that, it makes big news. These people are dying quietly in little huts in Africa and Asia with their parents watching over them as they go. And so that's why we're so emotional about this and want to allow golden rice now. We're going on a tour of South Asia in March of coming year to the Philippines to meet the scientists who are developing golden rice, talk to the media, meet politicians who are involved in eventually approving it and demonstrating against golden rice and, against Greenpeace and their allies. And then we're going to Bangladesh to congratulate them on their progress in biotechnology. 70% of Bangladeshi citizens are farmers, so you can't tell them they can't adopt modern technology because that's what they want. And so Bangladesh is the first country to approve a GM vegetable, eggplant, which is the basic vegetable in almost all of South Asia. It's a vegetable that is resistant against another boring insect that goes inside it and eats the inside out of it. And they're spraying pesticides every 2 to 3 days to stop this insect. This ends the spraying for that particular damaging insect. And then we're going to India, where again we'll meet political people, do media conferences, meet scientists, and protest against Greenpeace and Vandana Shiva, whose offices are in Delhi, and Greenpeace's offices who are in Delhi and Mumbai. So we'll hopefully make a splash there like we have in Europe. Again, if you go to the media page on Allow Golden Rice Now, you will see that we have done this in a polite way to a certain extent. We're not breaking anything. We're not yelling obscenities at anybody. We're just standing in front of Greenpeace offices and getting our picture taken and getting in the newspaper to show that there are people who are campaigning for golden rice, not just people who are campaigning against it. And that's my story. Thank you for listening. Allow Golden Rice Now.
Dig deep if you feel it, and let's just start. Yeah, please.
I'd like to hear Brandy's view.
Okay, Kyla asked about Brandy's view on golden rice.
Thank you. You know, I have to admit that I came tonight to learn. So it's pretty hard to form a full opinion when I'm musing over some new information. And so with that, I don't know if my thoughts so far are as much about an actual entity or a product or the thing, but the whole construct around it. And that's where a lot of my thinking has gone already, but even more so tonight. And I think something that was just said really caught me the most, and it's something that's come out of my mouth for a long time. And I was born into the 60s and the revolution. And I'm born of two folks who are born of the revolutions. And it came to pass probably somewhere in the 90s for me of sitting around at one more avant-garde conversation about how to get arrested, that it was starting to become really popular. My dad used to go to jail before people thought it was a trendy thing to do, to put roadblocks on the road or do things. And I thought it was scary. And then it suddenly became where it almost became a competitive thing to see how many times that you got arrested. And the underpinning of that is to realize that sooner or later, it's fighting for peace is a completely upside down construct. And the idea of not standing for something and always being against something is probably the greatest opportunity for change. I don't think we ever know what we're really standing for in terms of the results it's going to have. And I don't think you can roll your dice. I mean, you have a child, you don't know what's going to this child is going to be that's born. We create something in the world. We don't exactly know what that is, but if we don't make an attempt towards change or possibilities, or to start to care fully and be careful, then all we're going to do is either be fighting or hurting ourselves somehow. So that's my answer so far. I think these are important conversations. And I don't think, much like anything else, I don't think there's a silver bullet answer to anything, and that everything is an attempt.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you. Any other questions?
I want to ask Ash something, because you've been obviously thinking about this issue of what hope is in the midst of this. And the first thing that appears to me is you see these indicators that everything is getting better. Child mortality hasn't stopped going down since the 70s, and there's never been fewer people fighting. And yet there's so much hopelessness around. How are you able to address that scenario where so many people are feeling like we're going to hell in a handbasket when there's so many indicators that we're actually improving?
So the question is,
First off, Michael, the deal was I came and spoke and didn't actually think people were going to ask me real questions. I was just going to tell funny stories because I'd rather tell funny stories. But okay, the question is, why can we not recognize that the world is actually getting better? Is that the question?
That's what the numbers tell us, like child mortality going down every year since 1972. I look at that and say, hey, that's getting better.
Well, the psychology answer is because, and here I can actually speak as someone who does marketing, we don't look at positives, we look at negatives. We sell ideas based on how much we fear them. So when things become positive, we just say, okay, that's the new standard, but all these terrible things are happening. And my personal opinion is, we have lost our way in one sense. We have forgotten how to really interpret the world in a way that makes sense to us. Because our systems are so large, because so many of us who don't live in communities where things like vitamin A deficiency are a problem, because they're tight-knit, they live. Making food is life for them. So they don't have a problem of intensity of life. They have opposite problems. But us who are so nourished, so well taken care of, we are distanced from any type of connection to a deeper purpose. And while we have that, all we feel is that, as I referenced, spiritual numbness. All we know is, I don't feel powerful. I don't feel like I can make a change. And then you notice all those negative things. So you decide that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. I also kind of throw in there, the numbers are improving, but there could always be some sort of terrible mutation that kills us all, or an asteroid, so it all becomes irrelevant in a giant sense. All we know is what we can interpret, and we're not really built to interpret a complex, intricate world. We're built mostly to be monkeys. We do that pretty well. So does that answer the question, or is that kind of too wishy-washy everywhere?
It's too wishy-washy. I was hoping you'd have the actual answer, but I wasn't.
Okay, this is why people out that way, because we're monkeys and we're kind of stupid. Frank.
So where does the hope come back?
Oh, because we're not just monkeys. We're also people who see the world. We're also people who perceive. We have dreams and aspirations, and we notice other people doing this, and we go, hey, that's a choice we make. That is a choice. We can live in a world where mortality is limited and we're all going to die. You know, like when it comes down to it, what does it matter? We live in a wonderful, magical world where we dance and our actions matter. It's not the world that changes, it's our perception of the world. Thank you for giving me a nice way to end, Julian.
Just the direction. Since you were mentioning the freedom of choice before in your speech so often, which is certainly something good to remind oneself. More questions from the audience. Yes, please.
I have a follow-on question for Brandy. If Dr. Moore is asking that communities permit the growth of this golden rice, you had the conversation in your kitchens where your community gets divided depending on what way to eat. Is that a question that your community could answer? To allow golden rice in your community? Based on the information you provided this evening?
I'm not entirely sure of what your question is. You're asking, ask it a little bit differently.
Presentation that you have these discussions frequently in your community about how to grow food, how to eat food. And Dr. Ward's question is, allow this genetically modified food, make an exception. Do you think your community would make an exception and allow golden rice to be served in your community?
Well, first I'll invite you to restate what you called the place and take the Y off of it. So it would suddenly spell our community. Yeah. And it's a good play on words because it actually speaks of a paradigm shift that potentially we can't allow something top down, but we can only bring it into happening from the bottom up. And so what I would answer to that is, when all the arguments and the challenge went on in terms of each time we keep colliding on certain subjects, I can tell you to the end of time, people will spend all their effort convincing each other and fighting about it. And the position that we took, whoever we was at that particular time, was to say we all need to learn more. I abhor marketing. I would question why we're doing anything based on marketing. And I know I'm never supposed to say that in some people's minds, but I would put everything I have on learning and education. So if everybody learned more, like I came to do tonight, if all of us learned more, hopefully we come to some most acceptable general choice that we could mostly live with. And there's still going to be like somebody who's got an extreme or radical food choice in that group that's going to say, not me. And then it's not about just having one choice, but maybe we have to make a couple of other choices. So could there be golden rice and jasmine rice grown in da-da-da, and somebody else doesn't bloody well eat rice at all, and they don't even want to see rice there because it's against their whole notion of what's healthy in the first place. So how to have everybody at the table being fed and actually being able to get into it, into the process together. I think once I was staying at an ashram and I went out and I was doing my karma yoga and I was milking cows, and I looked and there was a bunch of beef cows. And I said to the other person who was running the livestock, why are there beef cows in the ashram? I don't really understand. And he said, don't ask me, ask the guru. And so in your one main most important question that you're allowed to ask, I didn't ask how to get enlightenment or the many things. I said, why is there beef cows at the ashram? And Swami Radha said, you know, in North America, it seems much more important what goes out of your mouth, not what goes into it. And I don't think that's true for everywhere in the world when you're starving. How do you find whatever to eat, and does it include golden rice?
Thank you, Brandy. Was your question answered?
I forget what the question is.
You want to remind us of the question?
Sure. So I think he asked if Brandy's community, had an opinion that she'd like to share around whether we, as in our community, would eat and allow golden rice. My opinion on this matter is that first and foremost, all governments in the world should say to manufacturers of any products, whether it's labeling a cleaning product, whether it has poison in it, or a food product, should be labeled whether it's conventional or organic, and should, you as a person should have the choice of whether you are going to allow genetically modified into your body. And if there's a group in Asia that has a serious health problem, and that particular group that town says, yeah, let's give this a go, and we accept the risk, because genetically modified is a scary thing to a lot of people all over the world. And it hasn't been well tested. We don't know what the long-term, 50 years of eating golden rice is going to be, but if there's courageous people that are willing to, I say, hey, it's their bodies, they should have the choice. At the Eco Village, we're very fortunate where we have, 24 crops of food, and we have the luxury of eating, some fantastic qualities and varieties of food. So we will never have a vitamin A deficiency, and we choose to eat organic. That is our choice. And, we value small-scale agriculture and the diversity of rotating soil, and we're all about preserving the soil and building the soil. And we think that that's our answer to the world food crisis, is to go back to village living, and to, what I'm proud about is that Victoria itself has villages that are surfacing. Quadra Street Village, Cook Street Village. And, these villages are coming together, and they're choosing local food, and there's local markets that are sprouting up, and there's people coming together having potlucks. And there is change to go back to village life for deeper connection, and hopefully better quality food, and better quality education, and better quality community and connection, and taking care of one another. And that's really what I think it's all about, is we all need to take better care of one another. And it's not about us against them. It's about all of us, and how do we all survive and thrive at this time.
Thank you for that very passionate answer as well from the actual community. And great. Any more questions from the audience?
I'm unclear as to why the product is being banned. I mean, GMOs, and we were talking earlier, and genetically modified products are everywhere. I mean, starting with pharmaceuticals right up to tomatoes. I mean, and seeds, and you really can't get away from it. If you are buying any seed from any reputable or commercial seed producer for farms, you're more than likely buying something genetically modified.
So the question is, why is golden rice banned at the moment?
Well, actually, that's not true about seeds. They tell you when you buy seeds, you either buy non-genetically modified seeds or genetically modified seeds. That the average seeds that you buy are not genetically modified. There is no genetically modified tomato. There is no genetically modified tomato in the world of food. Doesn't exist. There was a flavor saver that it didn't even go on the market. So the only genetically modified foods of any importance are cotton, corn, soybeans, canola, and sugar beets. There are a few other minor ones, but those are really 99% of the genetically modified foods. And sugar beets are used to make sugar, and it's sucrose sugar, because sugar cane has glucose, but sugar beets, which are grown by the billions in Northern Europe and in Idaho to the south of us, are used as additives in food to sweeten food. They're not eaten as beets, but there's lots of them produced in the world. And soybeans are, you can have your edamame, and if you eat edamame at a restaurant here, it's probably genetically modified, because most of the edamame in the world, most of the soybeans are. But most of it goes for animal feed, for chickens and cows. And same with corn. Most corn goes for food for animals. But 90% of the corn grown in the United States is GMO now. But in general, your fruits and vegetables are not genetically modified. I don't know of one that is, in fact, in any store. And neither is any of the fish, and neither is any of the meat. The meat may have been fed genetically modified food, but the animal itself has not been genetically modified. There's only one genetically modified animal in the pipeline, and that is the Atlantic salmon that has its growth hormone turned on all year, so it grows faster. It's the only difference. It just grows faster. So, but I would say in response to what might happen to a person who eats golden rice for 50 years, they might live to be 50 years old without going blind or dying. And that would be the main thing that would happen to them. That is what the reason for this invention is so that people don't die when they're 3 and 5.
Back to the core of Satya's question. She asked
Why is it
golden
banned?
rice currently banned, yeah.
It's not so much that it's banned, but in fact, in many countries, and many of them are in these African and Asian regions, GM is banned, period. Nothing is allowed, not golden rice or anything else. But in the Philippines, they have corn that's allowed. In India, they have cotton that's allowed. In Bangladesh, they now have eggplant that is allowed. So there are a few exceptions in these countries that are allowing certain GM products, but not the whole range of them. The main countries that are growing a large range of GM foods is the United States and South American countries. That's where most of the GM food is grown in the world. China is also growing GM cotton and some GM trees. But again, they have very few GM crops. It's amazing that these few GM species which are being grown are some of the most important ones in the world. Wheat is really the only one of the huge crops, and potatoes, that hasn't been approved for any GM variety. So if you eat flour, you're not going to get any GM in it. But on the other hand, if in Europe and North America you labeled everything in a grocery store or in a supermarket that had been touched by genetic modification, nearly all the wine and beer and cheese and yogurt would be labeled, because the cultures and the yeasts are genetically modified that are used to produce them. And insulin is all GMO now, and in medicine there isn't even a worry about GMO for whatever reason, even though people are taking medicines that are produced by GMO in their bodies. Medicine and food, for some reason, seem to be treated differently in people's minds, although vitamin A is a food and a medicine all at once. Nutrition is really where medicine and food cross over, and health food is really food that is medicine. And so there isn't a sharp demarcation between medicine and food. But the reason these golden rice is not approved in the Philippines or Bangladesh or India or Indonesia or all these places where it's wanted so badly is because of the opposition to GM in general, and the fact that the anti-GM people have made it seem as though there is something scary, which there isn't. Otherwise, every health and nutrition and science organization in the world wouldn't say it's been so thoroughly tested. Even the European Science Commission, where the politicians overruled the advice from their own science body, says GM is safe, with no exception. There's nothing in it that could harm you. And what you do when you approve a GM food is you look at the content of the food. What's in here? Is there anything in here that could cause an allergy? No. Is there anything in here that is toxic? No. Is it lacking in any nutrient that it should have? No. What's scary about that?
So is it a ban through the to the government?
No, it's not that it's banned, it's that it's not approved.
But that's the government, is it not?
The government has to approve it.
So on a national level, they're saying we don't want this in our country.
No, the requirements are made more onerous all the time for the things that have to be gone through, even with a rice that just has beta-carotene in it. They treat it as if it's a poison, and you have to prove that it isn't poisonous, when there's no possibility of it being poisonous, because it's just rice with beta-carotene in it. There's nothing poisonous in it.
So what I wonder is the fear that Greenpeace has with this becoming approved. Is it that Monsanto would then have power, or it would become okay in people's minds to have genetically modified?
Golden rice has nothing to do with any commercial interest. All the commercial interests...
Greenpeace, but I'm just wondering what the fear is behind Greenpeace's opposition.
It is a campaign of spreading superstition. I don't think they are afraid. When you talk about marketing, actually Greenpeace behind the scenes has the money to buy the very best marketers in Europe and North America, and they do. And those are the people who are fashioning their sound bites for them, and what campaigns they should take on through focus groups and all the rest. And so, for example, recently Greenpeace published a big study, nice color brochure, booklet, with all pictures, really well done, artsy and everything, Trouble Brewing, basically accusing the tea industry in India of having all their tea contaminated with pesticides at high levels. right? At the same time, and of course tea is a really good thing to go after because everybody in India drinks tea and it's important culturally to them. But Greenpeace to this day, and this happened just about 2 months ago, Greenpeace still will not release the name of the lab they say did the testing and will not release the raw data. They say they have no obligation to do that. To the media they say that. We have no obligation to release this to industry. And so how can you defend yourself against these accusations when in fact many of the levels of pesticides Greenpeace is claiming are in tea are not chemically possible due to the solubility of those compounds. And the fact is the government, the agriculture people in India and the industry, the people who distribute tea, like those are big companies like Tata in India distributes a lot of tea, and Unilever, which is the big Dutch-British conglomerate food company, they distribute a lot of tea that's grown in India. They test it too. They send it to labs to make sure it complies. And India exports a lot of tea, and when you export any food item, it is tested in the country it's going into for pesticide residues before it's allowed in. And Indian tea has never had a problem up until now. And all of a sudden now Greenpeace says it has high levels of pesticide contamination and won't release the results. So this is the kind, they actually believe that it's okay for them to lie now, and they make stuff up. Money, $400 million a year. It's a huge fundraising machine backed up by professional marketers and fundraisers. And they just pick a topic, and mostly what they're after is big brand names. Unilever, Apple, Home Depot, Walmart, whatever. Any big name, they go after them. And then they pick on one big name in a sector, and they say, you sign this paper because otherwise we're going to come and banner your factory and your office and we're going to make you look bad in the media. And big brand names, their main thing is to protect the name because that's their marketing, that's their identity in the market, is their brand name. And so Greenpeace goes after Apple and says, Apple, you have to sign saying that when it's possible, you will take the PVC out of all the wiring insulation in your computer, because PVC is the poison plastic. I was sitting on PVC there. My credit cards are made of PVC. Anybody playing vinyl records is playing records made of PVC. It's not poison. It's one of the most innocuous, non-toxic substances in the world, but because it contains chlorine, Greenpeace has this campaign to call it the poison plastic. And they blackmail companies into taking PVC out of their products, and then as soon as Apple says, yes, we will endeavor to try by 2020 to eliminate the PVC from our product, they go to all other computer companies and say, look, Apple's done this, now you better do it or we'll be bannering you and we'll put you on the blacklist. So they divide and conquer brand names in sectors. Clothing in China is another one they've done, claiming all the clothing coming from China is full of toxics. It has some residue of the detergent that was used to wash it before it came out, so it's clean, you know, but that to them is a toxic residue. So this is the way they operate today, and why I left them in the first place, because I saw the writing on the wall a long time ago that that was the direction that Greenpeace was going to go in. Sensationalism, misinformation, and fear. And the tea in India example is a classic case of that tactic. And maybe we don't think it's a good thing that the hundreds of millions of people in India have a chance to be lifted up out of poverty. But what Greenpeace is doing in India has been declared by their own intelligence bureau as a threat to the economic security of the country of 1.3 billion people, because they're attacking their energy and their food. And there's only 3 things in this world that we need every day: food, energy, and materials to build our infrastructure. All of the infrastructure is built out of stuff that people are mining or cutting down trees to get, or making plastic from oil or natural gas to get. And that's where they're attacking, is in the basics of survival is what they're going after. And so that's why people are upset with them at a lot of levels.
Thank you. This guy is full of information, so if we keep rolling, he'll probably roll all night. We are 10 minutes over the time, so I would maybe encourage the group to come to one last question, if there is a last question. seems to be the most powerful one in the room. So there we go. So to sum up the question, it's basically two parts. What are our opinions on toxins such as pesticides? And the second part is if there is a larger ecology intention behind golden rice, especially in terms of the impacts on soil and water. Mm-hmm. So I'll start with Ash, and we'll make our way to the right. Remember, we're 10 minutes over the time already, so let's maybe be very precise.
Okay, pesticides. You know what? Necessary evil, I think. I don't like pesticides in my food. I'm also aware there's alternatives to them, but I've also been in parts of Asia, and this also answers the soil question pretty well. I think the particular advantage of golden rice is the fact that it's something they're already doing. They're planting rice. You give them this different type of seed, they plant it, and you can give them more knowledge. But this requires on-site presence. It requires teaching, which they may or may not be open to. Make the change you can the easiest possible way. Sometimes it's giving pesticides to people. I don't like it personally, but I'm all about human life and then nature, and keep moving down or moving up depending on how you look at it. So that's my very untrained opinion.
Thank you, Ash. I like the humor you're bringing into this night.
I like you a lot, Josh, and I don't like your question. So I'm not going to answer it. I actually want to ask another question from each of us. I'm sorry. And it's more around the question of what motivates us. So anything can move towards a solution. What is motivating that solution? Is it money? Is it prestige or some kind of ego contribution? What is that? The reason I actually showed the Greening the Desert video is because there's more ways to grow food and put nutrients in food than maybe changing the genetics of it. You can change the composition of it by changing the composition of the soil, and there's ways to change that too. That's a slower solution perhaps than that. I would ask too, and I would invite a hope with golden rice that more of the campaign goes to what the possibility is of feeding people, and not much energy is spent on fighting against Greenpeace's position or fighting against Vinanda Shiva's position. I think we're going to get ourselves back into that role of what we talked about, how many decades old we all are. Fighting for peace isn't going to do it. There's just so much time lost in that whole going back and forth thing. Last year, I think it was last year, someone came to visit and actually took a tub of canola margarine and smashed it all over the floor. And it was in front of a young person too. And then when I actually talked to the person about it later, the person's partner screamed at me, like, why was this in this place? This eco-villages can't have this in this place. And it was so extreme and so absolute and so violent The woman screamed this far from my face, "You're killing my unborn child." And I actually thought she was pregnant maybe and that I didn't know it. And then I realized later she was talking about these residuals were in her body, so her next children, and it was my fault. It was completely mine. I have to tell you, I had no clue that somebody had bought margarine and put it in, and I don't even really know where it came from. But, so, without getting into the argument with the person, it was more about how are we treating each other? Like, is this how we solve stuff in any way? And so I'm going to hand on the microphone and I'm going to ask a question. I want to put up my hand for that last question, but I'm going to use this moment to ask the question because I'm passing you the microphone. Patrick, I would ask you, what motivates you? What is you invested in Golden Rice? In what's, I get the politic, I get the logic, I get the science in the way the description has been. I'm asking you as a person, what had you take this on?
Well, it's something that I think Mike and I both learned from our father, who spent at least half of his life in community service running a small company on the north end of Vancouver Island with one hand behind his back and actually wanting to remain small is beautiful and not to end up consuming his whole life running business. And so community service is the best way to describe it. That's what makes me feel good inside when I think that I am helping to improve the situation in the community. But I will answer the pesticide question.
Could you just lift up the microphone?
I'm not used to that. The pesticide question can be answered this way. We call chemicals pesticides when they are used as medicine for plants. We call pesticides antibiotics when they are used as medicine for people and animals. So they both mean the same thing. Pesticide, as in suicide, means kill pest. Antibiotic means against life, kill life. And so these are medical terms to a certain extent. Veterinary science, for example, is really just medicine for animals. And plant protection is medicine for plants, and it involves using substances which kill the pest and not the plant. And so banning pesticides in agriculture would be very much the same as banning antibiotics in human medicine. And there are people who don't believe in antibiotics, but when they get an infection and the doctor says they're going to die if they don't take this pill, they usually end up taking the pill. And that's because they will die, and that's what happened to those potatoes I showed you, because they didn't have protection against an insect. And one of the beauties of genetic modification is, from the insect perspective, we can modify plants so that they do not need to be sprayed, at least for certain insects. And that would be like us becoming immune by taking a shot. And when we take the shot, as you know, we take actually the dead organism of the thing that's going to try to kill us so that our body sees it and develops antibodies against it. Plants don't have an immune system. Plants produce chemicals that ward off insects and fungus, but they don't always have what they need to do that, just like we don't always have an immune system that can save us from death from a particular disease like Ebola.
Thank you, Patrick. Can you also touch maybe just very briefly on that second part of the question, if there is an intention, an ecological intention in Golden Rice that has the soil and the waters in consideration?
Well, Golden Rice will basically be grown in the same paddies, which in Asia and Africa is almost all very small farms. There's not really a lot of big farms in those countries because the land has been divided up over so many generations. The farms are small. The rice growing is something that farmers know how to do. The people that are producing the seeds know how to produce seeds. And so they will be letting the farmer decide. Rice does not require a lot of chemicals or pesticides compared to many other crops. It's one of the cheapest and easiest crops to grow in the right environment, which is why so many poor people use it as their primary calorie because it's the cheapest starch that you can buy in the world compared to potatoes or corn or wheat or other forms of calories. So I think every farmer is concerned about maintaining the quality of their soil, because if they didn't, they'd go out of business. And this is true everywhere in the world. Farmers want to maintain fertility in their soil, and they do things that they believe will do that, like rotating crops is a big thing in agriculture. Another thing that GM allows is what's called no-till farming, where because you can control weeds better, you don't have to plow the field 2 or 3 times a year. And plowing causes a huge amount of soil erosion and oxidation. And if you can not plow, but just use seed drills to put the seeds in, that really improves the retention of carbon and nutrients and reduces the need for synthetic fertilizers. So, I mean, there's a whole raft of questions around these things, but generally, farmers have as one of their main intentions to retain fertility so that they don't have crop failures in the future as a result of degrading their soil.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Brandy, and thank you, Ash. Thank you, everybody involved in this evening. Let me just give you a last little insight that I picked up from the 3 presenters. When I listened to Ash, there was a lot of hope in what he shared, and there was a lot of consideration into the free choice we have, all of us every day. And I think that's something we can really take home from an evening like this. We are in a very privileged situation, and from that we arise to hope, and not from an underprivileged situation where hope has basically a last resort kind of attitude to it. And I really enjoyed, Ash, you coming from that perspective. Brandy, I really, really loved the steady reminder of living authentically, being fully in your own experience, and making education and the relationship the core of what we share. This is very much also this evening here, authentic conversations in a healthy way to form microcosms, to inform each other. And Patrick, the brothers. Patrick, you're very inspiring with your entire life story, and I really appreciate having you on this panel. And I have to admit, you're still mind-bombing my own conception about genetically modified organisms and what to think of them. And I'm very grateful to be educated on many levels, and I'm also challenged to form an own opinion beyond this evening, because as Brandy said, I don't even know fully yet where my opinion is to that extent tonight. But I think we all can go home inspired to a certain degree and keep expanding what we think about all these topics, and keep appreciating where we're at with the local food situation, see that there are many, many ways how we are living our access to food, from a local permaculture access to global ways of supporting those who actually are still suffering from malnutrition. Yeah, so something I did at the beginning of the conversation, I asked all of you for your intention tonight. And maybe just individually, we all go back to this intention as we close the evening and see what we take home from today. Thank you.